let's figure out the countdown text. Near the center of the screen, I want a countdown that goes 9, 8, 7, 6, on and on down to 0. Or really, when 0 hits, it's a different display, but it should go from 9 to 1. We could carefully orchestrate that from the New Year's countdown page. But what I would rather do is in the New Year's countdown page, I'd rather turn this landscape, I'd rather surround it with a stack and then simply reference the countdown text right here. I'd rather just let the countdown text widget decide when the right time is to display itself and then animate itself through those countdown numbers. That seems like an easier thing to me. Keep it kind of self-contained. So let's work towards that goal. Let's create that widget. I'll create a stateful widget called countdown text. We're going to have to bring in the current time, but first let's just get this sizing, alignment, styling, all the static stuff figured out. We'll use an align widget, which takes an alignment. We want this text to be horizontally centered, but we want to push it up a little bit in the y-axis because we have the mountains at the bottom. So let's push this text up a little bit. And then when we get to the animation in a moment, we're going to come back and put a transform and an opacity widget in here, but we're going to skip that for the moment and again, just get the static stuff figured out. For the text, let's just put the number 9 in there for now, and here's the text style. Color, we're going to go white to make it very bright against the nighttime sky. The font size is going to be huge at 240, and the font weight is going to be bold. Let's save that. Obviously, we don't want to be looking at this on top of the morning background. Let's come change our time. Let's go to 11 p.m., 59, 51. Not that the particular time matters a whole lot at the moment, but technically that's the time of day when the number 9 should appear. 51 seconds after 11 p.m. and 59 minutes. Now, with that, that is where I want the number. I want the number at that size, that color, all that. The static stuff is handled. And now we need to kind of work our way out to have this based on a real number or time, and to actually, I want it to animate. Now we could pass in a full date time and have this widget calculate what it needs to know. But we know this widget is based on seconds to midnight, or I guess seconds to New Year. We can just take in the number that we want to show, and then we're good. In other words, we know that we only want to display this thing between 9 and 1. Let me just show you what I'm thinking. Back up here where we actually use this thing, countdown text. What we can do is we can say seconds until New Year. And that's going to be equal to, this first thing doesn't exist yet, but imagine that we have a date time that knows exactly when the new year begins. We can take the difference between that date time and the current time, and then we can get it in, well, let me define this constant first, or this, let me define New Year date time. New Year date time is equal to date time parse 2021 January 1st at midnight, 0 seconds. So this is the date time of the new year, and we essentially subtract from it the current date time. And then we can get that in milliseconds, divide by 1,000, and then round up. We're going to round up. We can then essentially say seconds to new year like that. And then within countdown text, there are a number of ways we could do this. We could do an if statement here and only render this widget if we're between 1 and 9 seconds. Right here, we could pass in null for the number if it's not between 1 and 9, or we can just let countdown text make the decision on our behalf. I think we're okay with letting countdown text make the decision. We'll see how it turns out. So countdown text, it needs to take seconds to new year. So let's jump down there. And by default, I guess we can just leave it as null. We'll deal with the possibility that it's null. But based on the seconds until the new year, we want to render our countdown and animate it, etc. So how can we do that? First, if we are, well, I guess let's get this number just showing correctly first. If seconds to new year is null, or widget.seconds to new year is greater than 9, or seconds to new year is less than or equal to 0. Because when it hits 0, we don't want numbers. We want a whole different display, and we'll get to that. But if any of those things are true, we're just going to return an empty box. We're going to render nothing, essentially. But if the seconds to new year is 1 to 9, somewhere in there, we will render that here. Save that. Now let's see. It disappeared. Let's see if a hot restart fixes that. Otherwise, we got to go look at the clock. Okay, that fixed it. Nope, and it's ticking. There it goes. Tick, 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 tick. And that's because I must have left do tick to true. I did. So this is an example where we don't want to tick. We need to like stop and look at this for a second. Let's save. And we'll do a hot restart to get the clock back. And now we're back. Okay, so here we are back in our countdown text widget. If we're going to animate, then we need a single ticker provider state mixin, because that's going to allow us to actually watch the clock and do the animation. We're also going to need an animation controller. So what are we animating? I want us to scale up and fade in, and then disappear, and the next number scales up and fades in. But I don't want the number to disappear as soon as it fades in. I want it to fade in and then sit there for like half a second and then disappear, which means if our animation takes, let's say, a full second, we only want to use a portion of that time to fade in and scale up. So we're going to use intervals for that. First is the opacity interval, which is going, so our animation is, we haven't defined this yet, but our animation is going to take 1 second. And that seems like a convenient number for us, given that the number changes every single second. So we'll just give ourselves a second and we'll do whatever we want in that second. But we are going to fade in, the opacity is going to go from 0 to 1 in 4/10 or 40% of 1 second. So for 60% of the time, it's going to be visible. 40% of the time, it's fading in. And then we're going to have an interval for scale. We're going to scale from 0 to 100% in half a second. But we're also going to use a curve. We're going to kind of bounce in technically bounce out. We're going to bounce our scale all the way up. And then we're going to keep track of the number that we currently display so that we can tell when the number changes. Now, in init state, what are we going to do here? We need to instantiate our animation controller. So animation controller, vsync is this. The duration, I said, let's make it 1 second. And then we're going to add a listener. And every time the animation changes, we're going to redraw ourselves. Instantiate the animation controller, pass in ourselves for the vsync. The animation lasts 1 second, and we re-render every time the animation changes. We also need to set our display number. That's going to be seconds to New Year as soon as the widget is first instantiated. And if that number is not null, really, let's say this is the condition we care about right here. If we should be counting down. So let's put that in a function to make it really easy for us to ask that question. If we're not, and we have to invert it now, if we're not null and we're less than or equal to 9 and we're greater than 0, then we are counting down. So if we're not counting down, then we're going to return an empty box. That's what we're doing down here. But also in init state, if we are already counting down, if the moment that we're built for the very first time, we're already within 10 seconds of the new year, we need to start running our animation. Okay. We also care about did update widget. Because when the number changes, we need to get rid of the old number, animate in the new number. If widget dot seconds to new year is not equal to our display number, then display number needs to equal the new widget value. And if we're counting down, then we need to run our animation. So the number initially is 9. A second later, our widget changes and the number is 8. So we run this check. 9 is not equal to 8. So we update our display number to 8. 8 is still between 1 and 9. 8 is still a countdown number. So this is true. So we animate in the number 8. Then the same thing happens for 7, 6, 5, 4, etc. As always with animations, we need to dispose our animation controller. Okay. Lastly, I mentioned that we're going to want to scale and we want an opacity. So we'll come down in here into our widget tree. We will use a transform.scale. And the scale is going to be equal to the scale interval transform the show number controller. This is our animation controller dot value. So this is the animated scale value that we want to use. Then we want opacity. The opacity is going to be equal to the opacity interval transforming our animation controller. So this is our animated opacity value. Now let's go ahead and save that. And let's do a hot restart. So notice that the 9 came right in, right? But nothing else happened, and that's because do tick is false. So let's turn this to true and see what happens. Well, so the updated numbers for some reason are not coming through. Let's see what we did wrong. And the problem is that that's also another issue. Forward, if we're already at 100%, it doesn't go anywhere. We have to explicitly tell it to start at 0. So that will solve one problem. Now these negative numbers are another problem. Why are they showing? So is counting down, when the numbers are negative, this should be and. That's the problem. So if we're not null and we're less than or equal to 9 and we're greater than 0, then we are counting down. Save that. Now it's gone, right? Now the negative numbers don't come through. But we want to rerun this. To set the clock back to where it was, we need to do a hot restart. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And that's where we want the Happy New Year and the fireworks. And that's what we're going to work on in the next step. To get the Happy New Year message in here, we're going to do almost the exact same thing that we did for the countdown. We're just showing some different text. So let's go ahead and create a Happy New Year text widget. Again, very similar workflow here. New stateful widget, Happy New Year text. We're going to bring in the seconds to New Year, just like we did in the previous one. Down here in our build method, let's go ahead and copy this concept here of is counting down. But we will instead say should display Happy New Year's. This first condition of seconds not being null, we still want that to be the same. But after that, we're going to change it a little bit. We want to know, so now we're into negative numbers. If we are less than 0, but we are greater than negative 35, less than 0 means the countdown is over. The countdown has completed. But we don't want to show Happy New Year's forever. I mean, you could, but I don't want to show Happy New Year forever. I want to show it for 35 seconds. That's just a choice. We're going to get into fireworks in the next section. Those are going to last for a little while. I want it to display for 35 seconds, and that's why we are looking for greater than negative 35. If not, should display Happy New Year's, return size box. But otherwise, we want to return what we actually want to display. Here again, we'll use align. And this time, we'll still be horizontally centered, but we're going to push up negative 0.35 on the Y. Once again, we're going to have a scale and opacity just like the other, but let's get our non-moving parts in here first. Happy new line, new line year. Text align center. This one will definitely take up multiple lines. We want the text to be centered. Style, text style. Color will be white. The font size will be large, but will be 80, so not nearly as large as the countdown text. Font weight will be bold. And I'm going to slightly reduce the height between the lines of text. With that defined, again, it's not animated yet, but it will be. Let's come up into our New Year's countdown page widget. And we can have New Year, Happy New Year text. Seconds to New Year. There we go. Now, obviously, these two should never display at the same time. Their internal implementations will prevent them from displaying at the same time. But of course, you want to take care to make sure that that's the case. So let's save. Let's do a hot restart to get the countdown. There's Happy New Year. This should be less than or equal to 0. That's why we ended up with a second gap between the countdown and the Happy New Year. So if we're equal to 0, we want Happy New Year on the screen. But we're still not animated, so let's follow the exact same thing that we did for the previous widget. Bring in the single ticker mixin, declare an animation controller, show Happy New Year controller, an interval for opacity. We're going to end up using the same interval. You don't have to, but seems to work just fine. Scale. Again, we're going to make it the same, but you could change this one if you want it to be different than the countdown text. Init state. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to copy it from up here, and then we'll make whatever changes we need. The controller name is different, so we'll replace that. Okay, and then our method that tells us the condition for ticking is different. Display number we no longer need. Well, let's think about that, I guess. Do we care about this widget changing that countdown value? I think we do. I think we care about that. So let me put that back. We probably don't want to call it display number, but we can say previous seconds to New Year. And so we set that initially, and then if we should immediately show the Happy New Year's, we go ahead and do it. Down here, if those two values are not the same, then we update the internal value and we say if should display Happy New Year's. Now, one difference here, we don't, unlike the number countdown, we don't want to restart the animation if it's already run. If the animation is already run, it stays run. We don't want to rerun it just because the time has changed. So we'll call forward just to make sure that it has run, but we're not going to reset it. Okay. Now let's see here. Okay, opacity and scale are not used, and that's because we have not actually applied those widgets to our tree. Once again, we're going to want transform.scale. The scale is the scale interval transform the controller value, and then we're going to do the same thing for opacity. The opacity is the opacity interval transforming the controller value. Let's save. And I think if we go through the countdown again, we will get the animation. Okay, so now we get the Happy New Year. We're pretty much there. The one thing that I still don't like about what's going to happen is that after 35 seconds, it's just going to immediately disappear. It's not going to fade out, and I would like for it to fade out. Here's how we can solve that. Well, first, let's watch it happen, and then we'll solve it. All right, you saw it just flash right out. And that's because the instant that we should no longer show it, we're returning a sized box. To solve that, let's use a widget that we've already worked with a couple times, animated switcher. Duration 500 milliseconds. If should display Happy New Year, great. We do what we were doing before. Otherwise, we will return a sized box. Actually, I think we can return null here. I think animated switcher can handle null. Let's find out. We'll have to wait. Well, I would say we'll have to wait 35 seconds, but maybe we can just control the time and not wait very long at all. So let's change the time to the new year, January 1st, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 30 seconds. Let's see what happens. Maybe we do still need a hot restart. I wonder why that didn't show it. Let's go see what it thinks the time is. It might, well, no, even with the hot, I was going to say it might be because the animation already completed, but we did a hot restart, so that shouldn't be the case. Let's see down here on the build method what it thinks the seconds to New Year is. Well, I made it January 1st, but I did not make it January 1st, 2021. I kept the same year. So let's try taking that to 30 seconds. Okay, now it's back. And it faded away. And anytime we change this time, it'll reset the time for us. So we're within the first 35 seconds, then in this case 6 seconds go by, and then it fades out. So now we're cooking. Now if we want to watch the whole thing, so 20, 20, 12, 31, 11, 59, 49, excuse me, 23, 59, 49. Let's see what we got going here. Happy New Year. And then we're going to sit here for a full 35 seconds together and see this thing hopefully fade out. There we go. Perfect. And in the next step, we are literally going to have fireworks. Let's get one firework explosion working, and then we'll figure out how to get multiples. The first thing you should do is bring in a package called confetti. This is not perfect for fireworks. Confetti, it's made to emulate confetti, which are little pieces of paper floating to the ground. That's not perfect for a ballistic projectile explosion, but it's going to get close enough for us. So bring in the confetti package, and that's what we're going to use to get our fireworks effect. Now, where are we going to display it? We're going to come all the way down to our landscape. Here's our landscape. And remember that our landscape is a stack: sky, stars, mountains, text. we're just going to come stick the fireworks right in here in the middle. The fireworks are behind the mountains, but they're in front of the sky and the stars, right? Does that make sense? So we're just going to take in a widget for fireworks and stick it right there in the middle of our stack. So up here where landscape takes in its parameters, we're going to take in a widget called fireworks. And we're going to say this dot fireworks. And in case it's not provided, we're just going to go with the size box. Save that. Okay. And now we are ready to take in some kind of fireworks display. Let's see where we use landscape. We use landscape up here. Right now, I don't care what time of day it is. We are going to create an emitter of particles. We're going to create a little fireworks display. So here for fireworks, we're going to align. And for the moment, again, we're just working on one emission right now. So we're going to put it in a specific spot, about 75% up, 75% from the bottom of the screen, horizontally centered. And then in here, we want a confetti widget. Now this confetti widget is going to need what's called a confetti controller. We're going to need to create what we will call a fireworks controller. Let's go do that now. We will create it in a init state. It wants a duration. This is how long will the emitter keep emitting. We actually only want it to emit one time, so we're going to give it a very small number, which is 1 second. And for our purposes, just to see the demo, we're going to immediately start playing the confetti as soon as this widget is first created. We will change that later, but for now, that's good. That'll allow us to quickly try it over and over again. But now we have a whole bunch of properties that we need to provide to the confetti widget to get the effect that we want. So first, display target will draw a little target where it emits. That's going to help us kind of see where it's emitting from. So we're going to display that for now. Blast directionality. We want this to be explosive. We don't want it going one direction. We want 360, which also requires that we pass in 2π for the blast direction. Colors, for now, we're just going to make it red. The minimum size is going to be very small at 1 pixel by 1 pixel. The maximum size is still going to be relatively small at 5 pixels by 5 pixels. We're going to use very small blast forces because we're trying to pretend that we're looking at fireworks off in the distance. So they should not blow up all the way across the screen rapidly, because that's not how fireworks actually look in the distance. So very, very small blast force, very small difference between the minimum and maximum. Gravity, we're going to go 0.1. These are all numbers that I experimented with. Particle drag, 0.1. Number of particles, 35. That's the number per emission. Emission frequency, I would prefer a way to just turn emission off after the first one. It doesn't seem to exist, so we're just going to give an extremely low percentage. And then should loop, false. For every particular firework explosion, we only want one right there, and then we want a different explosion somewhere else. So we're not looping, we're not repeating emissions, any of that. Let's save that. Oh, let's see, we have an error here. Need to import math. Okay, save. Let's try a hot restart. Well, actually, before we do a hot restart, let's go up here and change the time. I don't want us dealing with the countdown right now. Did you catch that right there? Let me also get rid of this print statement, because that's going to annoy me. Let's do a hot restart again. You see that? That's our firework. That's one firework. The question then becomes, based on how we created a single firework, how do we create a bunch of fireworks over time in random places? Again, one firework right there at that specific location. We want to kind of smatter them all over the sky. Let's figure out how to do that. Let's come back up here to where we were. Let's see, where were we? We were right here. We're not going to have one controller. We're going to have a list of controllers. We're going to have a list of confetti controllers called firework controllers. Fireworks controllers. I don't know if that should be plural or singular. We're also going to keep track of when each of these fireworks begin. And every one of these firework displays is going to have its own alignment. We currently have the fireworks at centered horizontally. So we have an alignment of 0, negative 0.5 or something like that. And that's right here where my cursor is on the screen. Every firework emission that we create should be in a different place. So it should have its own alignment. That's what we're keeping track of right here. Now let's think for a moment about when we want to run the fireworks. We don't want fireworks going off all the time, always. We want the fireworks to start going off right at New Year's and then never again. For that reason, we can get rid of init state. Here's the only condition that matters. Did update widget if old widget dot current time dot year is not equal to the current year, then we want to do fireworks. That's the condition, right? Literally when the year changes is the only time that we want to run our firework celebration. And so we'll implement a method called do fireworks that does it, but that's exactly when we want to do it. And we're also going to need a timer. Generate more fireworks timer, and we'll see how that's used in a moment. Now in dispose, if that timer is currently going, we want to cancel it. Again, we'll see how that's used in a moment, but we need to cancel a timer if it's still running when we dispose. Also, for every single controller in our fireworks controllers, we need to dispose the controller. That's our cleanup here. And then most of the rest of what we need to worry about all comes down to do fireworks. One thing we're going to do is after, I was going to say that we should stop the fireworks controllers after a certain period of time. But now that I think about it, I actually think I think the way that this package works isn't even relevant to what I was going to try to do there. So I was going to start by actually canceling old controllers. I'm not going to do that. Don't worry about that. Forget I even said that. What we are going to do is add a new fireworks emission. So every time we run this method, we're going to add one more fireworks display to the sky. But only if there are less than 25. So essentially, we're going to keep adding one after the other until we get up to 25 displays throughout the entire celebration, and then we're done. Then fireworks are over. So we will, we will create the new controller. All of them will go for 1 second, and we will immediately start running it. Fireworks controller, we will add it. Fireworks, that should not be state times, that should be start times. We will add the current date time. And I can't remember if we're actually going to be able to use that start time or not. We'll see. The point is I wanted to figure out when these controllers were done doing their job. I'm not sure it matters now. So we'll see if it comes back. But for now, we're saying, okay, we're starting this guy right now. And so we're adding that to the list. Now, every time we run this, or every time we create a new controller, we want a random position. So let's create a random. And then let's calculate a horizontal alignment. We will say random next double times 2.0. Alignment goes from -1 to +1. So that's 2 minus 1. That's a random number between -1 and +1, which is what alignment wants. That's very similar for the vertical alignment, except we don't want the whole screen to be available. We just want the top half to be used. So we're going to multiply by -0.5 minus 0.5. This gives us a random number between -0.5 and -1. Let's see, if the random is 0, then we're -0.5. So it's between -0.5 and -1. We want all of these fireworks near the top of the screen, right? And that's what we're doing here. Fireworks alignments, add alignment, and we're going to pass in these two values, horizontal and vertical. We may need a set state here. We'll find out later. The question is whether the widget internally re-renders based on its controller, or if we need to invoke that. So we'll see in a moment. We might need set state, we might not. Now, after we create this new fireworks display, we want to prepare ourselves to do it again. But we only want to do it again if this widget still exists. If this widget still exists, then we will generate a random time. This is where this random number right here is where a lot of the natural look of a fireworks display comes in. When you're watching a fireworks display, they're going up at all sorts of different times. So when we generate the next fireworks, we want that to be random. We will allow for any time between essentially 0 seconds and 2 seconds. Generate more fireworks timer equals a new timer. We will run this timer after the random time has gone by. And then in the callback, only if we're still mounted, we will do fireworks all over again. We will run the same function over again to generate another firework. Now let's see how we're actually going to use all this information. Let's go ahead and build our fireworks after I resolve some errors here. Okay, that's fine. So we're back down, and here's where we build our landscape. Here's our fireworks property. Here's our one single fireworks display. We're going to cut that out. because we don't want one, we want a bunch. Let's cut that out and let's say build fireworks. Let's go implement that function or method. Build fireworks. And we're going to have to configure a few properties here, but let's use that widget tree that I just cut before I inadvertently lose it from my clipboard. So for every fireworks controller, we're going to want to have a widget, a confetti widget. In fact, we're going to want a list of confetti widgets. So we're going to say fireworks.add, and then I'll paste all that stuff that I cut out. And then at the end of this function, we're going to return a stack whose children are the fireworks. And I have to go figure out what's wrong with all of my spacing and references here. I may have one too many parentheses, I think. Oh, I copied, yeah, time and year. Time and year was part of the landscape. Let's go put that back. Whoops, darn it. Okay, I think I formatted everything correctly, and now we just need to go fill in all the details. So now for every single fireworks controller that we have, we are creating a confetti widget, and we were displaying it at one specific alignment, but we want to get the alignment for that particular fireworks display, and we want to get the controller for that particular fireworks display. We also, so at this point, what we are building a confetti widget for every controller, and we are randomly positioning every one of those displays, and they are each being controlled. That's all great, but we still need to update the colors. The colors is kind of the last remaining thing. We don't want everything to be red. So we're going to randomly select from 3 different colors. Blue, red, and white, or as the Americans would say, red, white, and blue. Color index is going to be random, next int 3, and then the color for this particular emission or fireworks explosion is going to be whatever color is at that index. Instead of red, we're going to go with color. And by the way, you could do multiple colors here, but I'm going to have each explosion be one single random color. So let's save that. Okay. Now, when does this happen? It happens at New Year's. Now, I want us to be able to see the fireworks without being covered by text. So I'm going to take our countdown text and Happy New Year out. Then I'm going to go back up to the top, and I'm going to change this to 55 seconds. So we're going to essentially wait 5 seconds and then have the fireworks go off. Let's see what happens. Or not. Let's see if a hot restart. Oh, sorry, this should be 23, but let's also do a hot restart just in case any of the state objects need to change. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Check it out. Check out all those fireworks going off. So random timing between all the fireworks. And 25 of these explosions are going to happen, and then it's over. And it might be kind of difficult to see on your screen. Obviously, the particles are not huge, but you can see it. And this will just be a decoration behind the text anyways. Now, there is one more detail that I want to get in here because there's a little effect that we can do that would really take these fireworks kind of to the next level visually, in my opinion. If we were actually watching fireworks above mountains, parts of the mountains would light up every time the fireworks explode. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to make that happen. In addition to the version of the mountains that you see here, I have another image of mountains at night where the highlighted parts of the mountain are even more highlighted. So let's make it so that every time the fireworks explode, the highlights get bright and then fade, bright and fade. Now, the control that we're going to introduce to do that is going to go back down in landscape. So let's find landscape again. Where is it? Landscape, jump down here. We're going to take in yet another property, which is going to be flash percent. Flash percent represents how bright the mountains should be. 0 is what we're already looking at. 1.0 or 100% means fully bright. And then by changing the percentage, that's how we fade out. In addition to build mountains, we're going to have build mountains flash. Let's implement that. Build mountains flash. Once again, we're going to position these mountains from the left to the right at the bottom. And we're going to use an opacity widget. This is what's going to fade out. The opacity is equal to the flash percent. And the child is going to be an image asset. It is going to be mountains night flash.png, and the fit is going to be cover. Essentially, we're going to cover these mountains with a different image of mountains that have a brighter highlight. And I will show you what that looks like at maximum highlight. So let's see, let's come back here to landscape, flash percent, we'll say 1.0, and we will save. And now you can see the highlighted mountains, right? So right when the fireworks go off, this is what the mountains should look like. And then they should fade until the next firework goes off. This means that we need an animation controller. Animation controller, mountain flash controller. Now we need to bring back a init state to create that controller. VSync is this. Duration, we're going to fade out in half a second, 500 milliseconds. And every time this animation changes, we're going to call set state. And all of these embedded functions are now confusing me. I can't read it. Add a listener, set state. Yeah, okay. We also need to mix in the ticker provider so that we can actually create an animation controller. We, of course, need to now dispose of this animation controller. Now, when do we run this animation? We run it every time that we call do fireworks. So right here, after we create a new fireworks display, we'll say mountain flash controller run from 0. Essentially run yourself again. Now, actually, do we want it running from 0? We actually want this to run in reverse. We want it to start at 100% and go down to 0. 100% bright down to 0. So instead of forward, let's say reverse from 1.0. 1.0 down to 0. And then all we need to do is use this value in the right place. We'll come down here to flash percent, and we will just pass in the mountain flash controller value. And because it initializes to 0, we won't see it initially, but we'll see it every time that the fireworks go off. So let's save that, and let's do a hot restart. And we should see it in 3, 2, 1, boom. Isn't that an awesome effect? Every time the fireworks go off, the mountain lights up. I think that totally changes the dynamic. Now let's bring back the countdown and the Happy New Year. Actually, hold on. Trying to avoid spoiling the whole thing. Okay. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! Woo! Fireworks, mountains lighting up, Happy New Year message, and it'll sit here for 35 seconds into 2021, and then it will fade out. So we can just enjoy that. All right. That is your welcome to 2021. Now, early on, we did some testing. We tested one of our widgets, which is good that we tested it. But we also want to, like, if we were shipping this, we would need to know that the countdown actually counts down. And we would need to know that Happy New Year's is shown when it should be shown. So in the next and final step, I'm going to show you how we can generate golden tests for each of those moments too. And then we're done. And then you can have this app for your New Year's countdown. This is where we separate the professionals from the amateurs. You see, now that we have something that we think we're ready to ship, we better write some tests for this thing. It would be irresponsible for us to ship something to customers without any attempt to verify beyond manual testing that it does what it should do. We're going to continue to lean on golden tests because we want to make sure that the screen looks exactly the way the screen should look at the most important times, namely immediately before and during and immediately after the countdown. So let's return to our project structure and our test directory, and let's create a new test file. We will call it New Year's Countdown Test. Once again, we will start a new Dart application. We will invoke the test goldens method. We will pass in a test name of New Year's Countdown Goldens. We will define our test method like any other. And just like we did before, we are going to configure to look like iPhone 11. And now we want to start pumping out golden tests. We will, again, we'll need to start by pumping widget. So we will await tester.pump widget. And what do we actually want to display? Well, remember, we still need a material app. And we should now have a scaffold inside of this widget. We're going to test. Previously, we tested landscape. We tested just one widget among all of our widgets because it was an important widget to get right. But now we're testing the whole screen, the whole thing. So our New Year's countdown screen should look correct with nothing else above it beyond a material app widget. But now for these tests, this is where our tooling comes in. This is where another place where we definitely need to override the start date time, and we definitely need do tick to be false. We don't want to animate any of this. We want to capture at a moment in time. So we don't want to tick, and we need to override the time. But what time do we want to actually validate? Well, for this first one, we want to make sure that right before the countdown, we aren't displaying the countdown, right? We don't want to count down too early. So let's parse a date, 2020 12/31, so December 31st, 11 p.m., 59 minutes, 49 seconds. At 49 seconds, there should not be any countdown. So we should just see a normal night sky in this situation. We'll pump that widget tree, and then we will await screen matches golden, name, 11 seconds to go. And actually, I guess, I think when I originally did this, I started the countdown at 10 seconds. That's easy enough to change, but we have it set up currently for 9 seconds. So instead of 11, we can just test 10. 10 seconds in our current implementation shouldn't show anything either. Let's save. In the terminal, we will say Flutter test update goldens. We do not want to actually run a test. We want to create a new golden file. And it's important now that we specify specifically the New Year's countdown test. If we just say Flutter test, it's going to regenerate all of our golden files. And that's not what we want. We just want to generate the ones in this test file. Let's see what happens, see if we got this right. Okay, 10 seconds to go. And there's our night sky and our mountains and no countdown. Now you might notice this crazy looking series of boxes down here at the bottom of the screen. What's this all about? Well, by default, widget tests and therefore golden tests do not render using normal fonts. They render using a special font that draws every character like a box. And this has to do with the repeatability of tests. Fonts have different, fonts are made up of all these curves that change at different sizes. Anti-aliasing algorithms can change where particular pixels render. And this is not something that most golden or most widget tests care about. And so instead of rendering actual tests, they just they render boxes. We do care about what's actually displayed because we're trying to do a visual verification of the screen. So fortunately, there is a way in most cases to get around this. The Golden Toolkit package provides a function called load app fonts. And it is asynchronous. So we need to alter our main method to be asynchronous as well. But here at the beginning of our Dart program, we're going to load the app fonts and then we're going to run our tests. Let's save that, let's regenerate, and let's see if that fixes our problem. Ten seconds to go, and it's difficult to read, but now we have actual fonts down here. They might not be quite the same fonts, but they're close enough. So now we're good to go with our tests. We need 10 more tests from 9, maybe 9 more tests, from 9 to 0 essentially. Now, once again, I don't want to repeat this widget tree every time. It's going to be almost identical. So let's cut this out. and we're going to create a function called screen for date time. And then we'll define that down here. And now, once again, we've made a change. Let's make sure that we render the same thing. So I'm going to run Flutter test, but I'm not going to update the goldens. I'm going to actually run the test. I'm going to make sure that the change that I just made didn't break what we already had working. And the test passes, so we're all good. Now we can keep moving forward. Essentially, we need to run this same thing for every single second of the countdown and then the New Year's message. So let's make that happen. Let's see. Actually, so I had a bug in the test the whole time. I wasn't thinking this should not be 10, this should be 50. And then this should be 51, and it's 9 seconds to go. So let's run this. Let's make sure both of these images look the way they should. We're regenerating the goldens now, and I'm going to manually check both of them. Okay, 10 seconds to go. We're still good. 9 seconds to go. There's the 9. We're good there too. So now let's keep trucking. 52, and that is 8 seconds to go. 53, 7 seconds to go. By the way, it might seem tedious to check every number. The reason I'm doing that here is because with a New Year countdown, literally every number is important. I don't always test every permutation of something. I'm doing that here because it's actually important to our users. We need to make sure that they see every single countdown number. You should always think when you're testing, what are the most important things to test and why? Because sometimes the answer to that question can be very different. And then here we flip over to the new year. We're 2021 01 01 000000. Happy New Year. This should now generate every freeze frame that we care about. It doesn't really test our animations. You might have other mechanisms to do that, or your manual test might be sufficient for the animations. This is us doing a check on every freeze frame, every individual second. So let's make sure that they all work as they should. Okay, so 10 seconds to go, 9 seconds to go, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. You now have a tested Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2021.